The Bible is full of devious and unsavory characters, yet it is the first of these wicked men who casts the longest shadow. Cain, the world's first murderer, a man who, out of envy, murdered his own brother and went on to populate the pre-flood world with his own tainted offspring. But where the Bible allows Cain to fade into obscurity, Jewish legends tell us that Cain's character was much, much worse. There are those who place him as the father of the Nephilim, the son of Samael, and even the angel of death. In this video, I want to share with you some of the darkest legends of Cain and reveal where various midrash posit him as not only the world's first murderer, but perhaps the world's worst man. Many will already know that the biblical account of Cain is rather straightforward. When Adam makes love to his wife Eve, she gives birth to Cain, their firstborn, and then later Abel, their secondborn. Abel, we understand, was the keeper of the flocks, whilst Cain was a worker of the soil. It came to pass that both brothers were urged by Adam to bring offerings of their profession to God, to which Abel brought the fat portions of some of his firstborn flock, whilst Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil. The Bible tells us that the Lord looked favourably on Abel's offerings, but on Cain's offerings he did not share the same enthusiasm. This angered Cain and resulted in him turning bitter and jealous toward his younger brother. This resentment cultivated in Cain one day leading Abel out into the field, where he attacked him and killed him. As punishment for this crime, God cursed Cain so that he was no longer able to grow anything from the ground, before adding that he will be a restless wanderer on the earth. To this, Cain exclaimed that this was more punishment than he could bear, and was particularly concerned about being ambushed and killed by whoever found him whilst he was wandering. God assured Cain that any who struck him before his punishment had ended would suffer his vengeance 7 times over, and so as to ensure Cain could be identified, he placed a mark on him, so that everyone who came upon him would know not to kill him. Beyond this, all the Bible tells us is that Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden, before taking a wife and having a son. Now this is all pretty straightforward, but the biblical account does leave room for much curiosity. For example, we don't know what it was that made Cain capable of murder in the first place. Are we to believe this was merely some genetic predisposition? Or was there something that made Cain more likely to resort to violence? We don't know what the Mark of Cain really was, how it worked, or what it even looked like. We aren't told of who his wife was, where she'd come from, or whether she was an immediate daughter of Adam. We aren't told of what happened to Cain, whether he continued to wander the earth up until the days of the flood, or whether he was killed prematurely. All these gaps, if you will, were obvious to the ancient rabbis and Jewish storytellers, who in an effort to fill these holes and make the narrative more complete, didn't seem to mind adding some complex, if not rather outlandish ideas in order to create a more comprehensive account. It must be said though that these ideas only serve to darken the already dubious character of Cain and sully him even further. In one of the main Jewish legends that deviates dramatically from the Bible, the conception and parentage of Cain is called into question. The idea proposes that if both Adam and Eve were made wholly good by God, then how could they have produced such a villain as Cain? In order to explain this, ancient writers sought to propose that Cain, therefore, wasn't actually the child of Adam, but was born from an illicit affair between Eve and the devil Samael. Known as the serpent seed theory, the legend explains that after God had created the earth, Samael descended upon the garden, and upon seeing Eve, was either besotted with her, or, wishing to cause God great pain, sought to defile her. In the night, he was able to seduce Eve, and from this unholy coupling, Cain was conceived, the very son of the devil. Another legend suggests that it was the serpent, again in the guise of Samael, who came upon Eve whilst she was alone and infused her with lust. According to a Jewish compendium of legends known as the Tree of Souls, it is written, "When the serpent consorted with Eve, he cast impurity into her. From the impurity with which the serpent infected Eve, emerged Cain." Now when Adam beheld Cain, he knew immediately that this was not his son. The legend explains that he was not after his likeness, nor after his image, but instead was that of a heavenly likeness, perhaps even part angelic. But the narrative leads us to believe that there was nothing inherently good about Cain, and that there was likely too much Samael in him. It determines that Adam wouldn't see his own legacy manifest until the line of Seth, where from that bloodline arose all the generations of the righteous. All the generations that descended from the seed of Cain, however, are described as being wicked, all the way up until this very day, which serves to explain why some people are good and some people are evil. In fact, Schwartz adds in his Tree of Souls that there were efforts in various midrash to explain the existence of Israel's enemies, that they were all descended from the seed of Cain, and were thus wicked. He adds that during and after the Holocaust, the Nazis themselves were often identified as being born from the seed of Cain, or being living examples of Cain's descendants. Whilst Cain's descendants are then understood to be undeniably wicked, another legend aims to further tarnish this bloodline by suggesting that the Nephilim were also descended from the seed of Cain, and that Cain was the father of these giants. For those unaware, the Nephilim are traditionally believed to be the monstrous offspring of the women who were seduced by fallen angels in the pre-flood times. These giants were known to be wicked beings with insatiable appetites, and as we know from the Book of Enoch, were shown to consume all of the earth's resources before turning on man and eventually each other. Whilst most accounts attribute their birth to the mating of the angels with the daughters of men, Zohar 137a implies that they too must have spawned from Cain's seed, for how else could they have been so despicably evil? The account notes that as a result of his mother Eve having been injected with the slime of Samael, everything born from that slime, that being Cain, could only ever be immoral and depraved. As noted by Schwartz, after Eve bore Cain, Cain's features were notably different from any other man born thereafter, and that only he could have produced something as destructive and grotesque as the giants, who nearly destroyed the earth. The Tree of Souls further expands on the legend, referencing Zohar 136b, where it is said that both Adam and the serpent slept with Eve, and that this then explained why Cain was evil and why Abel was good, with the latter being conceived from the side of holiness and the former being conceived from the side of unholiness. This then explained why Abel was commonly considered to be born in the likeness of God, but that Cain would look like something else, a nether image as Schwartz describes it. Just what this nether image was is never really explained. A commentary of the Zohar, known as the Radiance of the Zohar, however, explains that Cain's face was like that of an ape, presenting Cain as less like a man and more like something subhuman, perhaps something more likely to be prone to violence and devoid of conscience. The traditional Bible is very quick to gloss over the details surrounding Eve's delivery of Cain. For believers, this would be the very first childbirth, a significant milestone in human history. Yet the Genesis account doesn't tell us anything out of the ordinary here. In fact, considering Eve is cursed to receive excruciating pains during childbirth as a result of her eating from the Tree of Knowledge, there doesn't seem to be any mention of it. Again, the Jewish legends make up for this. In one version, Adam actually leaves Eve after discovering that she had an affair, and wants nothing to do with an offspring he knows is not his. Eve is actually seen to enter herself into exile to deliver the baby alone, and experiences such harrowing pains that her voice carries on the night air. Even when Eve prays to God and the angels for reprieve, she is rebuked and shunned. Here we are reminded that childbirth would be agonizing for women as a result of Eve's temptation, but it would appear her labor is even more painful because she carries the sinister spawn of Samael, that which was causing her great anguish. In another legend, Adam wept and prayed to God on Eve's behalf, in the hopes that he might show her leniency during labor. Because of God's love for Adam, he actually does grant him this request, and 2 angels are sent down to serve as midwives for Eve. Before too long, Eve gave birth to Cain, but again, he didn't have the typical appearance that one might expect. The text describes his body as being the colour of stars, perhaps as good a sign as any that this was the spawn of an angel, not of a man. What's more, Cain demonstrated the ability to walk almost immediately, for no sooner was he out of the womb was he running in the grass, where he plucked up a heap of it. The legend recounts that since that day, nothing would ever grow in this patch of land, and that everywhere he stepped that day became infertile. The angel who was serving as midwife became alarmed at this development, and sensing the evil residing in the boy, declared, "You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. Your legacy will be one of adultery and bitterness." And so it came to pass. Whilst the common consensus is that Cain killed Abel out of jealousy, the Bible never actually confirms this. As you might then imagine, without the motivation for the murder being specifically determined, ancient rabbis were quick to speculate. One of the most common explanations from the realm of Jewish law is that Cain killed his brother over a woman, likely his sister wife. Again, the biblical narrative makes no reference of Cain and Abel having sisters, but one Jewish legend proposes that both were born with twin sisters, and that Adam decreed that Cain should marry Abel's twin, and Abel should marry Cain's. This didn't sit right with Cain though, who had already come to find his own twin attractive, and thus wanted to marry her for himself. When he was denied, he eliminated Abel from the scene altogether, and then took his twin to be his wife all the same. This idea would then also work to explain who Cain's wife actually was, especially since we are led to believe from the biblical narrative that Adam and Eve were the only other people on the earth. A more twisted version of this legend exists, where Cain and Abel were fighting over Eve, though not the Eve that gave birth to them. It coincides with yet another early myth that there was a first Eve, usually believed to be Lilith, who was created not from Adam's rib, but also from the dust of the earth. However, when God presented this Eve to Adam, he was horrified by her, pleading with God to take her away, for the sight of her was so disgusting. Whilst she is seldom described in any of the legends, Schwartz notes that she may have been made inside out, and that according to Genesis Rabbah, she is detailed with discharge and blood, giving her a gory semblance. For this reason, Adam rejected her, and this first Eve simply disappears from the story. We aren't told in this legend whether she too was booted from the Garden of Eden, nor given any details as to how she survived outside of it if she was, but that Cain and Abel were willing to fight to the death over her. A gruesome story where Cain is portrayed akin to a vampire exists within a legend known as Eve's night vision, where Eve has a premonition of her son's fateful confrontation. She dreams that Cain was feasting on the body of Abel, drinking his blood without mercy. When she told this to her husband, Adam immediately saw it as an omen that Cain would likely kill Abel. In an effort to avoid this outcome, he separated his sons and told them to go and live in separate places. Yet when God becomes aware of this, he tells the angel Michael to go down to stop Adam from doing this, explaining that Cain was a son of wrath, and that his killing of Abel was inevitable. He also would explain that Adam ought not to grieve, because God would promise another son in Seth, and that through him, many mysteries would be revealed. And so when Adam learned of this, he allowed the brothers to reunite, but privately mourned with Eve, knowing that Abel was fated to die at the hands of his bloodthirsty brother. Toward the end of the biblical narrative, we understand that after Cain is cursed to become a ceaseless wanderer of the earth, he protests against the severity of his punishment. Of particular interest to the early rabbis, and certainly to the modern readers of today, was the Mark of Cain, specifically what it looked like and what properties it consisted of. One of the earliest midrash to speculate on the Mark of Cain was Genesis Rabbah 22:12, where the Rabbi Judah proposed that this mark was never on Cain's body, but rather was the shining of the sun. This was contested immediately by Rabbi Nehemiah, who proposed that the mark was actually leprosy, and that it was so severe that Cain would live in permanent discomfort during the days of his wandering. Another rabbi, in Rabbi Abba Jos, suggested that an actual horn grew out of Cain's head, and that this would transfigure him so much that it would go hand in hand with him being mistaken for an animal and killed by Lamech in a later legend. One other idea is that the Mark of Cain was a hound that was cursed to follow him wherever he went. There exists an interpretation that the only thing created on the first day was the angel of death. The idea stems from the use of darkness being over the face of the earth in Genesis 1, and that this was representative of death being absolute in the beginning. However, others argue that death, or the idea of the angel of death, didn't come into fruition until much later, specifically at the moment when Adam and Eve sinned. For the serpent was the angel of death, as it enabled death for the entire world by ensuring Adam and Eve's mortality. Others propose that there was no need for an angel of death until Cain slew Abel, to which God then transformed Cain into this being as punishment for having committed a murder, and thus engineered the first death. According to the Tree of Souls, this would see Cain serve as the angel of death for 130 years during the time of his endless wandering, all the way up until he was eventually slain by his descendant Lamech, who would come to take his place. As aforementioned, the traditional biblical narrative never provides us with the details as to what exactly happened to Cain. Whilst there are those that believe Cain continued to wander the earth, somehow surviving the flood and emerging into the new world as a perpetual drifter, the Jewish legends provide a conclusion for Cain's life and show us that he too died an equally horrific death as he had inflicted on his brother. The most popular version is that during his exile, a 5th generation descendant in Lamech went hunting with his son Tubal Cain. Unfortunately, Lamech had lost much of his eyesight due to old age, and so he relied on Tubal Cain to point out where the game was, so that he might know where to shoot. Now when Tubal Cain saw a horned creature in the distance, he immediately pointed it out and instructed his father to let loose the arrow. The arrow found its target, but this was no beast, but instead Cain, whose mark, or horn, had deceived Tubal Cain into mistaking it for some animal. Other renditions of this tale suggest that Cain had matted fur, that he skulked around like an animal, and may have even taken on a more bestial appearance. Therefore, it was not out of the realm of possibility that Tubal Cain may have mistaken him for some wild creature. This story, when read in conjunction with the biblical account, allows for Lamech's later monologue to have more significance. We know he tells his wives in the biblical account that if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. And whilst this is quite arbitrary when read standalone, in conjunction with the Jewish legend, it conveys not only his fear, but also a full sense of bravado regarding God's promise. Schwartz argues that this line is almost certainly a part of a Lamech myth that is now lost to history, but with the Midrashic interpretation, it cleverly places Cain as the victim of Lamech, under the influence of an innocent Tubal Cain. It also works to incorporate the Mark of Cain, the horn, as an integral, if not ironic feature that led to Cain's demise. For though the horn was obviously meant to keep him alive, it is ultimately what leads to him being fatally wounded in this instance. What's more, this version of Cain's death provides us with a satisfying conclusion in a number of respects. For starters, it actually gives us an ending for Cain, but it also progresses the narrative by about 7 generations, showing us not only the lapse of time, but also the extent of Cain's punishment, that as a result of his wandering, he ultimately became more beast than man. Secondly, it also provides a unique and almost appropriate death for Cain, who, having slain his own blood, was in turn slain by his own descendant in an equally violent manner. In truth though, neither Lamech nor Tubal-Cain can be held responsible for the murder, given that Lamech was blind and Tubal-Cain had mistaken his target. Neither had intended to murder anyone in this narrative, least of all their own ancestors. What it leaves us with is a man who was so far beyond saving that he came to resemble a beast in the wild, a man who was viewed like an animal and killed like one too. The irony of Cain's name being in that of the descendant who assisted in killing him is not lost on us either, almost hinting at the idea that Cain, in a sense, killed himself. Another idea that coincides with the biblical narrative by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is that Cain most likely perished along with other sinners of the flood. The only issue here is that you might argue that this isn't satisfactory, given that Cain is not singled out here. He is punished alongside the rest of humanity for the greater sin, but not punished for having committed the murder of his brother. With this in mind, it is believed, according to Schwartz, that rabbis felt a decisive punishment was required in order to set the precedent for future murderers. This may have then come in the form of the apocryphal Book of Jubilees, where Cain was said to have been killed when his house fell down on top of him. Just as he had killed Abel with a stone, so too was he killed with stones. In this part of the text, it also goes on to link judgment with the law, saying that the instrument with which a man kills his neighbour will be the same with which he shall be killed, after the manner that he wounded him. Whilst the legends of Cain provide some damning fates for him, there does exist at least one account where Cain is actually forgiven. According to Genesis Rabbah 22:13, an encounter occurs between Cain and Adam, where after many years have passed, the two finally come face to face again. Here Adam asked Cain how his case went with the Lord, to which Cain replied that he had repented and was now reconciled. Upon hearing this, Adam struck his own face and started crying in amazement, that if even someone like him could be absolved of their crimes after repentance, then surely anyone could be forgiven if they gave themselves to the Lord. The tale aims to convey the importance of confession and remorse, showcasing that even those who have committed terrible sins are not necessarily exempt from heaven or God's good graces, providing they are willing to accept him. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.